In a world where quick decisions can change lives forever, one ordinary afternoon turns into a nightmare and a test of courage. Picture this: a bustling street filled with people going about their day, completely unaware that danger is just around the corner. Then, out of nowhere, chaos erupts. A terrorist attack is underway, and terror grips the crowd. But in the midst of the panic, one man, a black hero with the heart of a lion, steps forward. Without hesitation, he risks his life to protect innocent people, stopping a catastrophe that could have destroyed countless lives. He's a hero, right? You'd think the story ends with applause and gratitude, but not this time. Instead, moments after saving the day, sirens wail, blue and red lights flash, and a white officer arrives, gun drawn, without knowing the full picture. What happens next is both shocking and heartbreaking. A split-second decision changes everything, leaving a city torn between outrage, confusion, and calls for justice. But here's the question: what really went down in those intense moments? How did we get from a heroic act to a tragic misunderstanding? And most importantly, can justice prevail when trust is already broken? Stick around, because this story is just getting started, and it's one you won't forget. The crowd that had just been saved from tragedy stood frozen, their cheers fading into stunned silence as they watched the chaos unfold. A man who had moments ago been a savior was now face down on the pavement, his hands behind his back, pinned by the officer who had arrived too late to see the real threat. People in the crowd murmured in disbelief, some shouting, trying to tell the officer what had really happened. "He's the hero," one woman cried, pointing frantically. But in the heat of the moment, the officer's focus remained fixed on the man beneath him, adrenaline surging, instincts on high alert. Who was this man who had just risked it all to protect the very city that now viewed him with suspicion? His name was Marcus Williams, a local firefighter and army veteran known for his calm demeanor and relentless courage. That morning, like any other, he had kissed his wife goodbye and promised his daughter he'd be home for dinner. He never imagined that within hours he'd be hailed as a hero and treated like a criminal all in the same breath. As bystanders pleaded with the officer, Marcus kept silent, his eyes locked on the crowd, filled with a mix of fear and frustration. Little did anyone know, this was just the beginning of a story that would shake the entire city. As Marcus lay on the pavement, the weight of the officer's knee pressing into his back, he could hear bits and pieces of the crowd's desperate pleas. "He's not the suspect. You've got it all wrong." Their voices rose above the sirens, but it was like shouting into a void. The officer's face was tight with fear that had taken control before reason could catch up. Marcus's heart pounded, not from the officer's grip, but from the haunting realization that despite everything he'd done, this was the narrative playing out. No one was asking about the real threat, the person who had nearly turned the street into a scene of devastation. Marcus had taken down that threat with instincts sharpened by years in service, but now it was as if none of it mattered. Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, detectives were piecing together fragments of what had actually gone down. Surveillance footage captured grainy images of Marcus's daring act, tackling the armed suspect before the first shot was fired. Witness statements were rolling in, but with emotions running high, facts were getting tangled with opinions. Back at the scene, tensions flared as onlookers started pulling out their phones, recording every second. "We need backup," the officer muttered into his radio. Marcus's breath was steady, but inside, he knew one thing: this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a reckoning waiting to happen. Marcus's breaths came slow and measured, his training keeping him calm even as chaos erupted around him. The officer's grip was firm, but it was the weight of the misunderstanding that pressed hardest against Marcus. He wasn't just fighting the pavement beneath him. He was fighting a history that seemed to echo through every second of this moment. Onlookers grew louder, their voices blending into a rising tide of frustration and disbelief. "Let him go," a young man shouted, stepping forward. The officer's eyes darted between Marcus and the growing crowd, fear flashing across his face. backup was on its way, but the tension was already boiling over. At that moment, the voice of a witness broke through the noise. "I have it on video." He stopped the attack. She held up her phone, the screen displaying footage that captured Marcus's heroism. People craned to see, their voices shifting from outrage to urgent pleas for justice. But the officer remained frozen in place, torn between his training and the confusion swirling around him. Marcus could feel the shift in the air. This was the moment where things could either calm down or spiral completely out of control. Sirens blared in the distance, growing louder by the second. And then, just as the first additional squad cars pulled onto the scene, a voice crackled over the radio. "Suspect confirmed, neutralized by civilian. Repeat, civilian hero on site." The officer's grit faltered, and Marcus knew the story was about to change forever. But how? That answer was still hanging in the balance. The officer's grip loosened, and Marcus felt the weight lift from his back. For a moment, it seemed like reason was finally breaking through. The crowd murmured, their tension giving way to relief as the truth started to surface. But just as Marcus thought the nightmare was ending, a chilling shout shattered the fragile calm. "Bomb! There's another bomb!" The words sliced through the air, sending waves of panic rippling through the street. People scattered, knocking over barriers and pushing past each other in a desperate bid to escape. Marcus shot to his feet, his instincts kicking in before anyone else had a chance to react. The officer froze, his hand hovering near his radio. Confusion flickered across his face, torn between keeping control of the scene and responding to the new threat. Marcus locked eyes with him for a split second, reading the uncertainty there. "I need to move," Marcus said firmly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Trust me." The officer hesitated, but something in Marcus's steady gaze made him step aside. Marcus sprinted toward the direction of the shout, weaving through the crowd with laser focus. His mind raced. Was this a diversion or a legitimate threat? The earlier suspect had been taken down, but was there an accomplice no one had seen? As Marcus closed in, a glint of metal caught his eye near an abandoned backpack. The danger wasn't over, far from it, and now the stakes were higher than ever. Marcus's heart pounded as he reached the backpack. His hands moved swiftly, assessing the situation with a calm precision honed by years in the field. He could see wires peeking from inside. This wasn't a false alarm. People were still scrambling in every direction, unaware of just how close they were to disaster. "Clear the area," Marcus bellowed, his voice cutting through the chaos. The officer, now fully grasping the gravity of the situation, sprang into action, waving people back and calling for the bomb squad. But Marcus knew they didn't have time to wait. His training kicked in as he scanned the components, mentally calculating the best way to disarm it. Sweat dripped down his brow, but his hands remained steady. He carefully traced the main wire, the seconds ticking louder in his mind. With a deep breath, Marcus made his move. One sharp pull and silence. The faint hum of the device died instantly. For a moment, everything stood still, like the city itself was holding its breath. And then came the sound of cheers, hesitant at first, then growing louder as people realized the immediate danger had passed. The officer approached, his expression shifting from doubt to gratitude. "You saved us, again." But just as relief settled in, Marcus's eyes narrowed. A figure in the distance, the same accomplice from earlier, was slipping through the crowd unnoticed. The threat might be neutralized, but this fight was far from over. Marcus knew that his story as a hero wasn't finished yet. It was only just beginning. As the adrenaline faded and the crowd began to disperse, Marcus stood still, his eyes locked on where the accomplice had disappeared. The officer beside him followed his gaze. "We'll get him," the officer promised. For the first time since the chaos began, Marcus allowed himself a breath of relief. Emergency responders arrived, securing the area and assisting shaken bystanders. The officer, still catching his breath, turned to Marcus. "I'm sorry for what happened back there. I didn't see the full picture. You were the hero all along." Marcus met his gaze, the weight of the day heavy in his expression. "We both had choices to make," he said evenly. "I just hope next time we get it right from the start." Word of Marcus's bravery spread quickly, and within hours, the city hailed him not just as a hero, but as a symbol of resilience. His family, who had watched the terrifying footage on the news, finally embraced him that evening, their relief palpable. As Marcus walked home that night, the world felt different, both heavier and lighter. Though the terrorist threat was neutralized, the day had laid bare deep issues that couldn't be ignored. But Marcus had hope. He had seen people come together, fight for truth, and stand up for each other. And that, he knew, was a victory worth holding on to.